Therapist imposter syndrome, super real and affects so many of us in the helping professions, but it's not something that gets talked about a lot, and it needs to be. I have yet to meet a shrink, self included, who hasn't had that feeling. You know what I'm talking about? That self-doubt that maybe you're not really qualified to be guiding the work and in this therapist chair. It's only a matter of time before somebody uncovers you as a fraud. People are looking to you for answers that maybe you don't have. So maybe nobody actually has those answers, but in that moment, as the therapist, you feel this anxiety, this dread that maybe you're failing your clients. That is a bad feeling. And so if you've been struggling with this and you've questioned whether or not you're helping people, or if you really know what you're talking about, maybe I'm a fraud. Today's episode of Love, Happiness, and Success for Therapists is for you, because imposter syndrome is something almost every therapist faces at some point in their career. And by the end of today's episode, you're going to get clarity on insight into what's going on inside of you, some self-therapist stuff, but also things you can do to manage this so that it doesn't, crush you or make you feel incapacitated, but rather turns into a really positive and productive growth experience for you. So that's where we're going today. And if this is your first time tuning in, I'm so glad you're here. I'm Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby. Like you, I'm a therapist. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, a licensed psychologist, a very proud board certified coach. I am also an AMFT approved clinical supervisor for MFTs, and I'm the founder of Growing Self Counseling and Coaching. And over the years, I have had the great privilege of not just being a therapist and serving clients, but I have worked with and mentored countless therapists at this point. So my practice, Growing Self, it's a group private practice, 50 plus therapists running around here, and a number of clinical supervisees. And I do a lot of counselor education, coach trainings, different things. And I love supporting therapists in their personal and professional growth. And so the reason that I wanted to talk about this topic today, imposter syndrome for therapists, is because it's so rampant. I think it's something that all thoughtful, self-aware therapists experience at certain points in time. But I think oftentimes because we are in a professional role that is kind of defined by our being the people who are going to know what to do. Like, we have the answers, we have our act together. And, even though that's maybe not how we're putting ourselves out there, I think that that's what people want from us. That's what they expect from us. That's what they hope that we are. And so when we have these moments of self-doubt, which of course we do, it can feel really, really bad emotionally for us as therapists. And if we don't know how to manage these feelings, it can turn into not so great stuff inside of ourselves. Feelings like we're, failing our clients, or that we don't know what we're talking about. We're not competent to help people. And if we don't have ways of managing this anxiety and this doubt within ourselves as therapists, over time, it can contribute to deeper issues and even burnout, where we start to emotionally disengage because the work itself can be so stressful and fraught. So this is an important topic. It's a common experience, but it's something we all need to learn how to do. And so that's why we're going here today on Love, Happiness, and Success for Therapists. And so before we move on, if you haven't connected with me yet on LinkedIn, I would love it if you would. Look me up, Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby. Let's be friends on LinkedIn, because I'm making these podcasts and videos for you and for our tribe, our collective. And so I want to know what your reactions are to these. I want to know what would be helpful for you to hear about on these podcasts. And I really want to know how I can be of service to you you as a therapist. And so I want to start this dialogue. So if you have follow-up questions for me, ethical conundrums like, hey, Lisa, I want to talk about this on a podcast, bring it to me. I want to know. And then also thank you on behalf of our fellow therapists. If you're learning things or getting insights through these podcasts or videos, share it. Share it with your community, pay it forward. We are all in this together. We need each other. And so I think the more we can do to help each other in our shared profession, it will raise everybody's boat. Because when we take care of helpers, when we help the helpers, we are helping helpers help a lot of other people. And, it's the helpers that oftentimes are neglected and unseen. And, over time can really get the weight of our responsibility can become too much to bear if we're going it alone. So that's why we have to stick together. And that's why I'm here today and why you're here today. So let's get into it. So, imposter syndrome. Let's talk for a second about what this is, where it comes from, and then I'm going to be sharing a bunch of tips, things that you can do, actionable strategies to manage this and utilize it to turn it into growth promoting motivation. But typically, imposter syndrome is related to our feelings of competence and our confidence, typically as we're showing up in a professional. And so the reason why this happens, and I think why therapists are particularly vulnerable to imposter syndrome, is because of the reality that the work we do is often quite ambiguous. There are actually many different ways that we could respond to a client in any given moment. Additionally, there's a lot of gray. Maybe there isn't a right answer. Maybe nobody knows what to do. And maybe the real work that we're doing, the way that we're helping people is more experiential than it is actionable, or that it's something that we do. It's sort of more attached to a way of being that can feel quite nebulous. And so totally understandable, particularly if you have a client or clients for whom the current approach isn't as effective as you would hope, or maybe the work isn't moving as fast as you would hope, or maybe the client isn't, expressing like, oh, I'm getting so much out of this, and kind of just leaving, and you don't know how it's landing with them because there's not many tangible things that we have a lot of times in our role. It's very ethereal, right? Like, how do you measure success? How do you know if you're doing a good job? How do you know if things are working? We don't get that many times unless, we set up a lot of structures to operate differently. But so because of that, I think that it's really, really normal and common, and honestly, in my opinion, quite appropriate for ethical, thoughtful therapists to be sometimes wondering, am I doing this right? And that's actually my first strategy for you around how to handle this imposter syndrome experience is, first of all, to acknowledge it and also normalize this for yourself. I hope that you are in a supportive community of other clinicians who are talking about this, that you have a consultation group, or you have a relationship with a supervisor or a mentor who is like, yes, this is normal. But if you aren't, hear it from me. This is something that happens, and you need to acknowledge that this is going on for you in a compassionate way. And also to reframe this, I think people who are most vulnerable to imposter syndrome are actually high achievers who have a lot of motivation to do a good job and who have a very strong sense of responsibility for their clients and really wanting very much to be part of a client's process and really be helpful to them. So like that's your personality, but then you're in this role where it's vague, it's ambiguous, and you're not really getting a lot of feedback of whether or not you are doing the right thing, or being aware of the fact that there are actually many ways that you could do the right thing in any given moment, it creates anxiety, particularly if you like to know that you're doing a good job. And let's just normalize this further. You just spent, like, I don't know how many years in graduate school. You got feedback. You got an A on the paper. You passed the exam. You got the little comments in the margins. You were sitting behind the one-way mirror with a supervisor that was like, you did a nice job on this. Next time I'd like to see that. And you're like, oh, okay. Like, those are all really good things. But then you go off in the real world as a therapist and that stops. It's radio silence. And it's really, you need to decide, am I doing a good job? Am I not doing a good job? Is this good enough? Maybe it's not. What does that mean? And how am I going to grow? That's what we sign up for. But it can feel kind of intense. The second thing that you can be doing if you're struggling with imposter syndrome, once you become aware of it and acknowledge it, validate it, normalize it, is also to talk about it. Share these feelings with trusted colleagues, mentors. Maybe you have a personal therapist or a coach that you're working with to help you grow. And just putting it out in the open and getting support for yourself is very important. And also, I think that when we give these internal experiences some sunlight, it protects us from falling into shame. Shame is what harms us, right? This, sense that we're not good enough, we're not going to be good enough, other therapists are better than me, like that whole thing. We have to avoid going into a shame-based thing. And one of the ways that shame can show up in all of us, as well as our clients, is when we feel like we have to hide things. So, things that are shameful, we don't want other people to know about. And so to be opening this up, talking about this experience openly, is one of the ways that we are saying no to shame and yes to support, yes to self-reflection, yes to feedback, but also, I think, making ourselves available for the support of our communities and people who care about us. And, it's not just about you talking about your experience for your own benefit. You talking about these things openly, I think, creates in our entire community, the collective of therapists and helping professionals, this new understanding that, this is part of what it means. This is part of the role. This is something that happens to us. It's okay to talk about this. It happens to everybody, and we need to be talking about it. You are not alone. So you're talking about it as also being courageous and brave and holding that light up for other therapists to look at you and be like, okay, she's awesome or he's awesome, and they feel the same way that I do. So, maybe I'm okay. Woo! That's how we do this. A third thing I would encourage you to be thinking about and doing very actively are identifying the specific thoughts that are leading to this imposter syndrome, self-doubting experience. So, what are you actually telling yourself in the moment that you're feeling that way? Is it, I'm not good enough, which is a very shame-based kind of languaging, and experiment with reframing it into something like, what is my evidence for this or against this, right? Use a little bit of CBT on yourself and think about this, and maybe even do some journaling and replace these negative shame-based thoughts with more balanced and realistic ones. Start practicing some positive affirmations, reminding yourself of your strengths, your achievements, the value that you bring to your clients, the fact that this is oftentimes experiential and that it is fuzzy, right? That we don't actually know, and that there are many ways of slicing this bread when it comes to being a therapist with clients, but that, self-reflection, am I actually the worst therapist in the history of the world? Or, am I trying to bring value, or the things that I'm doing well, and being able to honor and recognize those and bring that back into your mindset in these moments when you start start doubting yourself and feeling low in shame-based and unproductive ways. Now, the next and most probably important thing that I would like to invite you to do, possibly the most important takeaway you'll get from this whole thing, is that our imposter syndrome on the one hand, being perfectly perfect on the other, right? Like, we need to stay out of both of these corners. So the opposite of imposter syndrome is not being 1000% confident and knowing exactly what to do all the time. Like, that is actually not a good space for any helping professional to be in. That kind of mindset creates a whole different set of problems, because the reality is that we as helpers have a mandate to be doing our own work and learning and growing constantly. And so while we want to stay out of the corner of imposter syndrome, can't go there, we can't go all the way to the other side, which is like, I know everything, I have nothing to learn. The balanced mindset here is, what do I have to learn? I don't love the way that session went. I feel like I'm actually not making as much progress with this client as I would like to. Why might that be, right? What do I have to learn? Am I trying to practice outside the scope of my current practice or my current skill set? And the experiences that I'm having are actually illuminating the fact that maybe I need some additional training in this area. Maybe I need to get some consultation. Maybe the approach that I'm trying to take with a client is not the best approach for this person. So maybe I need to do some reflection and modify my strategy, or look for some opportunities for me to grow and develop. That is also part of our job, is to be monitoring what's happening, the impact that we're having, how we're feeling is very important information, and then using that. But also being self-reflective. Is it also coming from, historically, I feel like I'm never good enough. I feel like I'm never doing a good job. I need a lot of external validation and I'm not getting it from my clients. Therefore, I'm feeling like, what do I do? Is it that? Or is it, I should probably get more training in XYZ if I want to work with clients like these. And this is one of the reasons why it's so important to be talking about these experiences with mentors, supervisors, consultation groups, other clinicians who know us and who love us and who can be in the ring with us and who care about us enough to either say, I've been in this consultation group with you a long time, and you frequently feel that way. I experience you as being a highly competent clinician. When you tell me about your cases, you are checking all the boxes. You are doing everything right. Like, taking that feedback in, can be really helpful, because it's like, oh yeah, this is my stuff, right? You need people who care about you in order to be honest with you in that way. And what a gift that is when we get that kind of feedback. But the core here to be able to do this and do it well is to adopt a growth mindset. And that means being just very centered in this idea that we're all growing and evolving constantly, and that we are embracing our challenges and listening to these feelings, being curious about them, and wondering, is there an opportunity for me to learn? And also, when you are confronted with feedback or signals, maybe you do have stuff to learn. It's not a statement about your worth, right? Or damage to your identity, or a test of your ability, your worth as a person. Rather, with a growth mindset, it turns into this, thank you for showing me and illuminating these learning opportunities that I have, and the fact that what we're doing is hard and that it takes practice, and that, this is a very, very challenging profession, and that competence is developed over time. Nobody bursts forth into the world being perfectly perfect at anything, much less as a therapist or a coach, is that we grow and evolve, and that this takes a lot longer than we often think it should, right? I mean, our development as counselors, as coaches, it is measured in years because we have to go through these experiences where we learn, we grow, we reflect, we're like, you know what, I do need to dig a little bit deeper into this, or how could I be more helpful to this client? And then it sends you into your own research, or maybe you encounter opportunities for personal growth that are salient to what your clients are going through. In my experience, a lot of therapists, too many, look at the continuing education requirements that they need to comply with in order to maintain licensure as just this box that needs to be checked, right? And I've done this myself, like, oh, I have to renew. Let me just do some online training really quick. Versus, really investing in growth and learning through continuing education that is formal and accredited, and yes, you get the certificate, but also, books that you're reading, articles that you're reading, whether through formal education, workshops, self-directed study, online programs. I mean, again, books, articles, talking to other people. These are all ways that we learn, we grow, we build new skills and develop new knowledge, which in turn boosts our confidence. But also recognizing that when you signed up for this profession, a commitment to ongoing learning and development is actually part of the job description. It's part of what it means to be a competent, ethical therapist. And just a little reframe, if you are feeling plagued by imposter syndrome, like, I don't want to feel this way anymore. Again, we need to explore it, normalize, notice where it comes from. But also, I would like to invite you just to consider whether these feelings could be a gift that are perhaps motivating you to think about, what do I need to learn? Where do I need to grow professionally? And then that turns into this, over time, accumulation of additional knowledge, additional perspective, additional skills that will allow you to feel more authentically competent and effective in your work with your clients. So your feelings of anxiety or imposter syndrome could be a really helpful and important signal for you to listen to, rather than something you're just trying to get away from. Now, after having said all that about the importance of the dark emotion that is imposter syndrome, and how, there might be things worth listening to in that, an additional strategy that we all need to be actively doing, particularly if we have that, gold star, high achievement personalities, like self included, is to be very reality based in whether or not we're also having realistic expectations of ourselves and our own performance, and that we are avoiding perfectionism when it comes to our work as therapists, because that is a recipe for disaster in any domain of life, right? But especially when we're bringing that high achievement, perfectionistic orientation to work with clients, it is always unattainable. We will never be perfectly perfect. That is not what this is. And most of the time in our role, we will not get feedback about whether or not we're doing it just right. So, like, what does perfect even mean? And I mean, even sometimes I've seen therapists that have a lot of anxiety around doing it right. Oftentimes, young therapists who are very early in their career will latch on fiercely to these manualized, very structured orientations, treatment modalities, because not necessarily because it's in the best interest of their clients, but because if they're following the steps that are prescribed, they're managing their own anxiety about whether or not they're doing a good job. But that In that, they can sometimes miss the fact that their clients are actually needing something else from them that results in the therapeutic experience not being effective, or that leads to ruptures with clients, even though the therapist was doing everything just right by the book. So again, we don't have a concrete thing that we do over and over and over again. And so any hope of perfection, just let it go now and set realistic goals for yourself. Celebrate small wins and make sure that you have a set of expectations of yours that are in alignment with reality, and also in alignment with what it means to be a good therapist that is in alignment with your value system, and that you're going to have to create that for yourself. You can journal about this. You can talk to a supervisor, mentor, consultation group about it. But how would you know if you were doing a good job? Define that for yourself in a realistic way, and then practice noticing it when you do it, because I bet that you're operating in that way a lot more often than you might feel like you are. So pay attention to everything you're doing right. And then the last thing I will share to help you manage these feelings of imposter syndrome, in addition to a commitment to learning and continual education, there is also a need for all of us as therapists to be very committed to self-reflection and our own personal growth process. And this means embracing the fact that you need time to reflect on how things are going, how you're feeling, how far you've come, considering the challenges that you've faced and the skills that you've developed, and think about your growth over time. Think about where you came from, where you are now, where you hope to go. And, don't compare yourself to other people. Compare yourself to yourself. And because of this reflective practice, we can counteract feelings of incompetence, because it highlights areas where we have developed competencies over time. And also, it is a good thing for us as clinicians to be aware of our growth margins, right? When we challenge ourselves to learn, to grow, to build our skills, to be more helpful to clients, that is a really positive thing. And that it's normal to have a little bit of or anxiety if you haven't done it 1,000 times and you don't know exactly what to do. But to have some of that intentional kind of reflection can help you define where those growth areas are for you. But also, this self-reflection over the lifespan of your career can really help you develop a sustainable, long-term, meaningful career trajectory, because you might also be having experiences professionally where perhaps you feel genuinely more effective with some clients and less so with other clients. Maybe it's different populations, different presenting issues, and maybe in that you are using these feelings of imposter syndrome, I feel confident here, less confident there, as actually this self-assessment that is helping you see your strengths, the things that you are good at as a therapist that you want to build on. If you feel particularly successful with a certain client population, think about why that is and how it plays to your strengths, your personality, your way of thinking, your way of being, and consider what of that you could build on. Could you develop a niche around that, a practice specialty around that? And also reflect on the fact that if you really feel not great or ineffective, or this isn't a good fit between you and a certain presenting issue or client population, what would happen if you respected that as well? Maybe you are in an employment role where you have to do a lot of different things and operate in a lot of different ways, and that's totally valid. But, to be a therapist who stays mentally and emotionally healthy and well over decades, right? And who can stay out of burnout and have a good time is to be thinking about, what are these feelings telling me about maybe what aren't strengths for me and what I should do less of, so that when the time comes to shift roles or change jobs, I can then be following these feelings and intentionally putting myself into situations where I do feel more competent and effective, enjoy the work more. If I want to learn and grow and build, like in what area is that? I have worked with so many therapists over the years who have done that. I can think of so many examples, but like people who are marriage and family therapists and who may have decided, yes, I want to specialize in couples and family therapy. And so they did that in graduate school. And then they get out into the world and start practicing couples and family therapy and are like, oh my gosh, this is so hard. This is hard for me. I don't feel effective with these clients. It's hard for me to manage the room, this level of conflict and the emotional intensity. Like, I don't like being around this sort of angry energy. Like, I don't feel competent. And to be thinking about, okay, where do you feel more competent? It's actually, you know what? The clients that come in here wanting to talk about their careers, I love that. Or work-life balance stuff, life transitions, figuring out who they are, what they want, how to get there. I love that. I feel like just my nature, I can be much more effective with those clients. I enjoy the work more. And really like tying your professional development evolution to that awareness and that self-reflection. I mean, on more than one occasion, those conversations that I have had with supervisees or colleagues has led to people specializing in other areas, like more than one. Marriage and family therapist has then become a certified career coach after going into the self-reflective process, and vice versa, right? And so I just wanted to illuminate this too, that self-reflection, listening to your feelings, honoring them, thinking about what it means to you is super important. And because this is so important, I mean, this is like a lot of what we do in our consultation groups here at Growing Self. Who am I? Where am I going? But I have also developed a new resource that I want to put in front of you. It is actually a resource that I developed because I specialize in coaching and I'm a coaching educator. I have a lot of therapists who come to me wanting to learn about coaching psychology and should I become a certified coach and what is involved with this. And so because I get this question so much, I put together like a should you be a coach ultimate guide thing where, to learn about coaching and that whole process. But because it is so profoundly important for me to help all therapists like you get true clarity, that like North Star of where do I want to go with my career, the whole first part of this free 2-part training is actually around that professional clarity. What am I doing with my life? What am I doing with my career? Where is all this going? To decide where you want to maybe double down, the direction that you want to move towards, something completely unrelated to coaching. It could be clinical mental health. It could be working with kids. It could be health. But then the second part of the training will give you a lot more specific information if you determine like, yeah, I think that actually coaching is a direction that I would like to go in. So anyway, I made this for you. I hope you take advantage of it. Totally free, growingself.com/coach. You can access it immediately, download the workbook, start doing the exercises just to do some of that self-reflection and getting career clarity. But listening to the voice of imposter syndrome as you do that work to help you just make contact with what your own emotional guidance system is telling you about who you are, what your strengths are, maybe, using it as a launch pad to work through some old, emotional unfinished business or patterns that are connected to your feelings of self-worth or perfectionistic tendencies. Like we all have that, right? So this experience gives us the opportunity to do that, but also use it to direct you around where do I actually need to learn and grow in a constructive and healthy way without collapsing into shame. And we do that by adopting a healthy growth mindset. We also have to do this work. We can't just ask our clients to do this work, sadly, but So I sincerely hope that this episode of the podcast was helpful for you and that it gave you some actionable strategies for things that you can do to manage the of imposter syndrome and pay it forward. If in listening to this, you're like, oh, my colleagues should really hear this, please share this podcast with them. My hope is that, we therapists are helping each other, supporting each other, helping each other grow, taking care of each other, because we as helpers, like, everybody wants us to take care of them. And we do that. We're helpers. We are here for other people and we need help and support. So thank you on behalf of other therapists not yet in our collective orbit for just putting this in front of them so that they can benefit from it too. Take advantage of the free resources that I mentioned. growingself.com/coach. Come to my website, growingself.com/therapists for more articles, podcasts. I make them for you. Let me know what's on your mind. Connect with me on LinkedIn and we'll keep this party going. Okay, see you next time.